Welcome to Horror Stories LCP, your ultimate destination for chilling tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. In today's episode, we dive deep into a haunting story that will leave you questioning the line between the living and the dead. This is the Echoes of Windfall House, a spine-tingling narrative filled with supernatural mysteries, dark secrets, and terrifying echoes from the past. Stay tuned as we unravel the eerie events surrounding an old mansion and the souls trapped within its decaying walls. Ready to be scared? Let's begin. So, the Echoes of Windfall House. Chapter 1. The Whispered Town. It was said that Windfall House had been cursed for over a century. Nestled on the outskirts of a remote American town, its once grand architecture now stood forgotten, tangled in the grip of the wild. The locals whispered that no one who entered Windfall House ever returned unchanged. Some never returned at all. Eve Thompson, a journalist in her early 30s, had heard all the legends. She was sent to the small town of Pine Brook for a feature on urban myths. Known for debunking paranormal rumors, she took the assignment lightly. To her, Windfall House was just another relic of superstition. Arriving in Pine Brook, Eve was immediately struck by how quiet it was. The streets were lined with closed shops, and the few locals who walked by avoided eye contact, glancing over their shoulders nervously. When Eve asked about Windfall House at the local diner, the waitress dropped her coffee cup, and an uneasy hush fell over the place. "It's not a story for outsiders," a man in his 70s warned her from the corner. His name was Jacob Hale, and he had lived in Pine Brook all his life. People vanish in that house. But the worst part is what happens to those who come back. Eve's interest peaked. Ignoring his warning, she pressed him for details. Jacob finally relented, telling her about the house's first owner, Oliver Windfall, a man obsessed with immortality. His obsession, fueled by ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge, had led to his death under mysterious circumstances. Since then, people had reported hearing whispers in the wind near the house, voices calling them inside. But Eve wasn't one to be scared off by ghost stories. She was determined to unravel the mystery. Chapter 2. Into the Heart of Windfall House. The house stood at the top of a hill, shrouded by thick trees and overgrown vines. Its grandeur, long faded, was still visible in the towering stone columns and the elaborate wrought iron gates now rusting at the hinges. As Eve approached, a chill crept over her. The air felt dense, like it was pressing against her skin. Wham! She took out her camera to snap a few photos, but the lens fogged over, obscuring the house. Wiping it clean, she felt a strange static hum in the air, like 1,000 whispered voices just out of earshot. The front door was unlocked, creaking open with a groan that echoed through the empty hallways. Eve stepped inside. The interior was dark, the windows covered in dust and grime, filtering the sunlight into thin beams that barely lit the space. Despite the decay, there was something unsettlingly alive about the house. The walls seemed to pulse, the shadows shifted in ways that defied the light. She set up her equipment, determined to capture anything paranormal. But as soon as she turned on her recorder, the static from the wind outside began to grow louder, and a faint, almost imperceptible voice spoke through the interference. Eve. Her heart skipped a beat. It was impossible. She hadn't said her name out loud since arriving. Eve replayed the recording, convinced it was a glitch, but the voice was unmistakable. So as night fell, the house grew colder. The temperature dropped unnaturally fast, and Eve began to hear the whispers again, only this time they were inside the house, echoing from the very walls. "So leave," one voice murmured, while another voice, deeper and more menacing, simply said, "Stay." Chapter 3. The Shadow's Touch. Gully pushed deeper into the house, finding rooms that defied explanation. Some were filled with decaying furniture and forgotten artifacts, while others were disturbingly pristine, as though frozen in time. In one room, she discovered a journal, its pages yellowed with age but perfectly legible. It belonged to Oliver Windfall. His writings were a descent into madness. Oliver had been obsessed with the void between life and death, convinced that he could transcend mortality by trapping his soul inside the house itself. The journal mentioned strange rituals, sacrifices, and something called the binding, which tethered the souls of those who entered the house to the very walls. Oliver believed he had succeeded, but his journal abruptly ended with the words, "She is here." Suddenly, Eve felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She spun around, but there was no one there, only the darkened hallway behind her. Yet, as she looked closer, the shadows on the walls seemed to shift unnaturally. And then she saw them faces, faint but unmistakable, moving within the walls. Their mouths opened in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Eve backed away, her breath quickening. The voices grew louder, more insistent. The house seemed to be alive, its very essence reaching out to her, trying to pull her in. So in her panic, she stumbled into a large room, a ballroom, its grand chandelier still hanging precariously from the ceiling. Something was wrong. The room felt distorted, as though space itself was warping. In the center of the room stood a figure, tall and gaunt, with eyes like hollow voids. "Oliver?" Eve whispered, though her voice faltered. The figure smiled, but it wasn't human. It was a mockery of life, a puppet animated by the house. "You shouldn't have come," it said, the voice a mixture of 1,000 others. "Now, you're one of us." Chapter 4. The Binding. Del, Eve ran, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could hear footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate, as though the house itself was following her. Their every door she tried was locked, and every hallway seemed to twist back on itself, leading her deeper into the house's labyrinthine structure. So as she stumbled through a dark corridor, Eve came face to face with the truth. Windfall House wasn't just haunted, it was a prison for the souls of those who entered. The ritual Oliver had performed had bound them here, their essence feeding the house's insatiable hunger for life. Desperate, Eve tried to retrace her steps, but the house had changed. The layout no longer matched her memory. She began hearing the voices of those trapped in the walls more clearly now. They were warning her. One voice, soft but urgent, whispered, "The mirror. It's the only way out." In the parlor, she found an ornate mirror, tall and imposing, covered in a thick layer of dust. As she wiped it clean, her reflection didn't appear. Instead, she saw images of the trapped souls flickering like fading flames, each desperate to escape. Before she could react, the figure of Oliver appeared behind her in the mirror. His eyes glowed with malevolent power, and his voice, cold as death, whispered, "The house has chosen you, Eve. You will stay, forever." Chapter 5. Breaking the Curse. But realizing that the mirror was connected to the house's curse, Eve made a split-second decision. She grabbed a heavy candlestick from the fireplace and with all her strength, smashed the mirror. The shattering glass sent a shockwave through the house. The whispers turned into agonized screams as the faces in the walls contorted in pain. The ground shook, and the walls began to crack as the house's grip on the soul started to weaken. But Eve wasn't free yet. Oliver's figure appeared again, this time more solid, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you can escape?" he growled, the house seeming to close in on her. So as the walls crumbled around her, Eve ran toward the front door, now wide open. The house was falling apart, its dark power unraveling. Just as she reached the threshold, she felt a hand grab her ankle, cold and unforgiving. With one final desperate push, she broke free, stumbling out into the cold night air as the house collapsed in on itself, taking Oliver and its cursed inhabitants with it. Epilogue. The Last Whisper. Eve left Pinebrook that night, her article unwritten. She knew that no one would believe what had happened at Windfall House. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a shadow standing by the side of the road. It was gone in an instant, but the echo of a familiar whisper lingered in her mind. you will return. The end. So this story builds suspense through psychological horror and supernatural elements, exploring the theme of a haunted, living house that traps souls. Touches on the idea of breaking free from an ancient curse while adding tension and action as Eve struggles to escape before becoming part of the house's twisted history. The story draws on modern horror's use of atmosphere, personal stakes, and the blurred line between reality and nightmare, creating a compelling and immersive experience. Thank you for tuning in to Horror Stories LCP and listening to the Echoes of Windfall House. We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale of mystery and supernatural terror. If you love horror stories like this, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next terrifying episode. Share with your friends who love a good scare, and we'll see you in the next story.